Hello, friends. Time for some NFL breaking news. I am Tom Downey. That is Mitchell Renz alongside me. Reuben Foster, the 49ers linebacker, has been suspended by the NFL. It is a 2-game suspension for violating the NFL's conduct and substance abuse policies. Mitchell, the violations stem from the weapons and drug charges that Foster faced earlier this year. And I do want to make very important note of this. In the NFL, at least the reports of it from Schefter and Rapport, aka from the NFL, in reality, they did not mention the actual domestic violence charges, so those are not included in this. And yet I feel like this is still the NFL getting Foster for that.
Yeah, it's still the NFL. I mean, are we really surprised at the NFL? I mean, they have so much power. I feel like, and this is, I don't know, I want to say if this is a Roger Goodell stint here, but, I mean, both of these issues, Tom, were resolved. I mean, I think you and I were both pretty surprised when we found out that he was going to be suspended for this, but at the same time, I'm not surprised because this is the NFL, this is what they do, and, well, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
All right, folks, let us know in the comments section. Type a 1 for yes if Foster should have been suspended. Give us a 2 for no. I'm sure Niners fans are definitely hammering that 2 number home. If you're not a Niners fan, let us know in the comments section here on Facebook and YouTube Live. Again, that's Mitchell Renz. He's on Twitter at MitchellRenz365. I'm Tom Downey on Twitter at WhatGoingDowney. We'll bring up the timeline overall viewpoint here of what has happened so far to Reuben Foster. In reality, it's been a very rough offseason for Foster. He's dealt with quite a bit of turmoil and trouble. We'll start back in January, not long after the season ended for the 49ers at least, was charged with second-degree marijuana possession. Then in February, he was arrested on suspicion of domestic violence. In April, he was charged with 3 different felonies from that domestic violence arrest. But then in April, Lisa Ennis first recants that domestic violence accusation. The DA in Santa Clara continues to press charges, though, and Foster pleads not guilty not that long after in May. Later in May, during the beginning of this trial here, Ennis testifies that she made up the domestic violence accusations, in a sense, ending any chance of that case going forward. The judge, unsurprisingly and rather harshly, rebuked the DA for even trying it and dropped the DV charges against Reuben Foster. And then 2 days later, the marijuana charges, which is something Foster has been suspended for, were also dropped. In June, after having a felony for the gun charge, he pled no contest to a misdemeanor gun charge. And then, of course, here today, July 3rd, Foster suspended 2 games. So the charges the NFL suspended him for, one of them was dropped. Yep. The second of which was reduced.
Yeah, and I mean, that was one heck of a list. I mean, just when you go through that entire list of everything that happened to Reuben Foster this offseason, I think for me in the beginning, I don't know if you can agree with me on this. When I saw all the stuff coming on with Reuben Foster, I was like, man, I just wish this kid could get it together. And then when you hear everything that went into it, I kind of felt bad for him at the end. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think he's unbelievably talented. He needs to get his head on straight. And I think at times when you see even with a guy like Jameis Winston, sometimes these guys just find a way to get in trouble. But I think recently, he's kind of getting the short end of the stick here, Tom.
And I think it's a little bit of both. And we saw him drop in the NFL draft. He probably would have been a top 10 pick had it not been for several different off-the-field concerns, one of which at the Combine involved getting into an argument with one of the hospital workers there. That was a big issue for teams. There were some medical issues as well, just in terms of his shoulder. But when he first had the arrest for marijuana, my initial thought was, I get that it's marijuana and it's really not a big deal. But in the words of Stephen A. Smith, lay off the weed. Like, can you just say no? Like, how difficult is that for NFL players? That was the big concern. And then after the domestic violence accusation, I think in general there was a little bit too much jumping to conclusions there.
Yeah.
But as we saw,
100%.
The charges were completely dropped because the alleged victim in this case, she literally made it up.
She literally said, I made it up. She was just like, I made it up. And that just baffles me that we still even had to go through with the whole court issue that we went through. But I'll tell you what, though. If Reuben Foster can get it together and he can play a full 14 games.
Immensely talented player.
Unbelievably talented. You could argue he was the most talented player on that defense, maybe minus DeForest Buckner. But, I mean, Tom, you're talking about a guy, 72 tackles last year in only 11 games. I mean, he was a big part of the reasons why the 49ers, I think, were much better on that defensive side of the ball. I mean, in 2016, the 49ers were the worst rush defense in the league, just ripped apart on the ground. Then you had a guy like Foster, and I don't want to say it ultimately fixed it, but he was a main reason why they were much better.
And I think in general, this is another example of inconsistent NFL disciplines. And we can go back to that last graphic we just had up because I really do appreciate that graphic there. Tom Brady suspended for 4 games for more probably not knowing balls were deflated or whatever. Thomas Davis gets 4 games for PEDs. Nigel Bradham gets a game for a incident back, I think it was in 2016, with a hotel worker and allegedly assaulting her. And then Zeke gets the 6 games for domestic violence accusations, even though there were no charges pressed whatsoever. And then Winston gets 3 as well for admitting to. In reality, it was sexual assault.
And the one that's not even on.
He groped a Uber driver.
Yeah, and the one that's not even on there is, I mean, it's from a little while ago, obviously, with the Ray Rice incident. We saw what happened with that. 2 games. Like, you
Brown,
can't.
The Giants kicker got a game, and then they changed their mind after he retired and adjusted it. So the inconsistent NFL discipline for me will continue to be an issue here. But I guess if you're Foster, you were facing the barrel of a 6-game suspension before Ennis recanted her accusation. So I guess it's a win on that end. The Niners, I think, will be fine. They have Malcolm Smith. I am a big fan of Fred Warner out of BYU.
Okay.
I think he could start early. Brock Coyle's got some experience in the system. Corey Toomer showed some flashes at times with the Chargers. So they'll be okay for the Niners, but hopefully for Foster, this is the end of it. He never has to deal with it ever again, and he stays on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, he needs to stay in the straight and narrow, and he also needs to stay healthy because he was a guy who you said coming into the draft, I thought personally he was a top 10 talent.
He was number 4 on my board.
Wow. Yeah,
overall.
And you definitely know the draft better than I do. There's no doubt about that. But, like, Foster, to me, was a top 10 pick. You're saying he's a top 5 talent, and he fell all the way down to 31 for the 49ers. And I remember after the draft last year for the 49ers, I was like, man, Solomon Thomas, Reuben Foster, I think the 49ers won the draft. Like,
they're huge winners in my mind.
They were unbelievable. And then he's just the guy, though, I felt like every single time he would finally get on the field, he would get banged up. And then he'd finally get on the field, and then he'd get banged up. And now when he is immensely talented, still only 24 years old, but, like, are we ever going to see the full aspect of what Reuben Foster can be? Like, I don't want to compare him to a guy like Aldon Smith, but I'm worried it's going to go down that road.
It's a fair question, and I think that Foster is a little bit different. I don't think that Foster has the same addiction issues that Aldon Smith clearly struggles from, which is a good thing there. And hopefully this, in reality, is a bit of a scared straight type moment here for Foster after the 2-game suspension, after the false domestic violence accusations and all that. But, folks, if you're just now joining us, I am Tom Downey. That is Mitchell Renz. Reuben Foster has been suspended by the NFL for 2 games. Now, this suspension does not relate to those domestic violence charges and the recanted accusation, but rather the weapon and drug charges that Foster faced this offseason. So here's kind of your recap timeline. Again, it's been a rough offseason for Foster, a rough couple months here, a rough 2018. Back in January, charged with marijuana possession. In February, had the arrest for suspicion of domestic violence. On April 12th, had the 3 felonies from that domestic violence arrest, 2 related to domestic violence, 1 was a weapons charge involved. And then April 25th, Ennis first recants her accusation. Now, the DA still goes forward with charges, and in their argument actually during the court proceeding, to which Foster pleaded not guilty, their closing argument, and I'm not making this up,
was literally laughable.
That Ennis was lying, but you couldn't trust her. So the domestic violence actually happened, but she was such a liar that you couldn't believe her right now. So she testified on May 17th that she made up the accusation. The DA said, no, you still can't believe her. It actually did happen. Even though Ennis could have perjured herself by testifying and made it very clear that was not the case. And the judge, unsurprisingly, more or less ripped into the DA and was like, you should have never done this. This was a waste of my time. So May 23rd, those charges are dropped. Then 2 days later, those marijuana charges, which Foster is partially suspended for, were also dropped. On June 6th, Foster says, you know what, let's just be done with this whole gun charge thing. The DA lowers the charges from a felony to a minor misdemeanor, and he pleads no contest there. And then today, July 3rd, not coincidentally, right before July 4th, the NFL leaks that Foster's been suspended 2 games in the NFL, and the Niners have also confirmed this as well.
Yeah.
This is the classic July 4th news dump by the NFL.